Have you ever wondered why the person who claims to love you the most is often the one who triggers your deepest rage, your most profound insecurities, your darkest thoughts? Why does intimacy seem to awaken parts of yourself you never knew existed, parts you wish would remain buried forever? Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the depths of the human psyche, discovered something unsettling about human relationships. They are not just connections between two people, but collisions between two unconscious worlds, each carrying the shadows, projections, and unhealed wounds of a lifetime. Today, you will discover the hidden psychological mechanisms that turn love into a battlefield, why your most intimate relationships become mirrors reflecting your deepest fears, and how understanding these patterns can transform your capacity for authentic connection. Jung believed that every relationship is a sacred encounter with aspects of ourselves we have long forgotten or desperately tried to deny. By the end of this exploration, you will understand why relationships trigger you so intensely, and more importantly, how these very triggers can become gateways to profound psychological and spiritual growth. The first psychological pattern Jung identified is what he called unconscious projection, the invisible mechanism by which we cast our own denied qualities onto those closest to us. Imagine Sarah, a woman who prides herself on being rational and controlled, consistently dating partners who are emotional and spontaneous. She finds herself constantly irritated by their expressiveness, calling them dramatic or unstable. What Sarah doesn't realize is that she is encountering her own disowned emotional nature through these partners. The parts of herself she learned to suppress in childhood, perhaps because her family valued stoicism over feeling, are now staring back at her through another person's behavior. Jung understood that we don't fall in love with people as they truly are, but with our projections of what they represent. When Sarah criticizes her partner's emotionality, she is actually encountering her own shadow, the collection of qualities, impulses, and characteristics she has rejected about herself. The intensity of her reaction is proportional to how much she has disowned this aspect of her own nature. This is why relationships can feel like psychological battlegrounds. We are literally fighting with parts of ourselves that we have externalized onto another person. The psychological consequence of this pattern is profound. Until Sarah recognizes that her partner's emotionality is triggering her own unlived emotional life, she will remain trapped in cycles of attraction and rejection, drawn to what she needs but repelled by what she fears within herself. The spiritual implication is even deeper. Our intimate relationships become the universe's way of forcing us to confront and integrate the parts of ourselves we have abandoned. The second pattern Jung discovered is the phenomenon of complementary wounding, where we unconsciously seek partners whose psychological wounds perfectly complement our own. Consider the dynamic between someone with abandonment trauma and someone with engulfment trauma. The person who fears abandonment will pursue and cling, while the person who fears engulfment will withdraw and create distance. Each partner's behavior triggers the other's deepest wound, creating a psychological dance of approach and avoidance that can last for decades. This pattern reveals something extraordinary about the psyche's drive toward wholeness. Jung believed that our unconscious mind seeks experiences that will force us to heal and grow, even if these experiences are initially painful. The person with abandonment trauma needs to learn self-reliance and inner security, while the person with engulfment trauma needs to learn intimacy and vulnerability. Their relationship becomes a healing laboratory where each partner provides exactly the experiences the other needs for psychological integration. However, without conscious awareness, this dynamic becomes destructive rather than transformative. The abandonment-wounded partner interprets their partner's need for space as rejection, while the engulfment wounded partner experiences their partner's desire for closeness as suffocation. Both partners remain unconscious to the fact that they are encountering their own healing edge through the other person's behavior. The psychological consequence is a relationship characterized by chronic misunderstanding and emotional reactivity. The spiritual opportunity, however, is immense. Each trigger becomes a doorway to healing patterns that may have been established in early childhood. The third psychological pattern Jung identified is the activation of parental complexes within intimate relationships. Every person carries within their psyche internalized images of their parents, what Jung called parental imagos. These are not memories of our actual parents, but psychological complexes formed from our early experiences of care, protection, love, and disappointment. When we enter intimate relationships, these parental complexes become activated, causing us to unconsciously relate to our partners as if they were our parents, and to behave toward them from our own wounded inner child. Michael, for instance, had a mother who was alternately smothering and rejecting, never allowing him to develop a secure sense of self. In his adult relationships, whenever his partner shows affection, he feels engulfed and pulls away. When she gives him space, he feels abandoned and becomes demanding. He is not responding to his partner's actual behavior, but to the activated complex of his early relationship with his mother. His partner becomes a screen onto which he projects his unresolved parental dynamics. This pattern explains why intimate relationships can feel so regressive, why we sometimes find ourselves acting like children or feeling triggered by behaviors that wouldn't bother us in casual friendships. The psychological container of intimacy reactivates our earliest attachment patterns, bringing unresolved childhood dynamics into present-day adult relationships. Jung understood that this regression, while painful, serves an essential psychological function. It brings unconscious material into consciousness where it can finally be healed. The consequence of unrecognized parental complexes in relationships is the perpetual recreation of childhood dramas. Partners become trapped in roles they never consciously chose, with one person cast as the abandoning parent and the other as the neglected child, or one as the controlling parent and the other as the rebellious teenager. The spiritual invitation in this pattern is profound. Our partners become vehicles through which we can finally resolve our earliest wounds and develop the secure internal parenting we may never have received. Take a moment to reflect on your own relationship patterns. Notice how your deepest triggers often connect to your earliest experiences of love, safety, and belonging. The person who irritates you most might be showing you exactly what you need to heal within yourself. The fourth pattern Jung discovered is the phenomenon of anima and animus projection, perhaps one of his most profound insights into the psychology of attraction and conflict. Jung believed that every person carries within their psyche a contrasexual archetype. Men carry the anima, their inner feminine aspect, while women carry the animus, their inner masculine aspect. These internal figures represent the qualities, characteristics, and ways of being that have been underdeveloped or suppressed due to cultural conditioning around gender roles. When we enter intimate relationships, we unconsciously project these internal figures onto our partners, expecting them to embody the qualities we have not developed within ourselves. A man who has disconnected from his emotional, intuitive, nurturing side might project his anima onto his female partner, expecting her to provide all the emotional intelligence and nurturing in the relationship. Similarly, a woman who has disconnected from her assertive, goal-oriented, decisive side might project her animus onto her male partner, expecting him to handle all decisions and provide direction for both of their lives. The initial attraction often stems from encountering these projected qualities in another person. We feel complete, whole, as if we have found our missing piece. However, as the relationship progresses, what once felt completing begins to feel constraining. The man becomes frustrated that his partner is too emotional, while she becomes irritated that he expects her to manage all the relationship's emotional needs. The woman becomes resentful that her partner makes all the decisions, while he becomes frustrated by her apparent lack of initiative. This pattern reveals the psyche's drive toward individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming whole and integrated. The discomfort we feel when our partner fails to perfectly embody our projected anima or animus is actually the psyche's way of pushing us toward developing these qualities within ourselves. The man must learn to access his own emotional intelligence and nurturing capacity, while the woman must develop her own assertiveness and decision-making abilities. The psychological consequence of unintegrated anima and animus projections is the creation of relationships based on incompleteness rather than wholeness. Partners become dependent on each other to provide what they refuse to develop within themselves, creating dynamics of resentment, expectation, and disappointment. The spiritual opportunity is the development of psychological androgyny, the integration of both masculine and feminine qualities within oneself, leading to relationships between two whole individuals rather than two halves seeking completion. The fifth psychological pattern Jung identified is the reactivation of collective and cultural shadows through intimate relationships. Beyond our personal shadows lie collective shadows, the disowned aspects of our families, communities, and cultures that get projected onto intimate partners. These might include cultural attitudes towards sexuality, power, money, success, or emotional expression that have been passed down through generations. Consider Emma, raised in a family where financial struggle was a source of shame and secrecy. Her family's collective shadow around money includes beliefs that wealthy people are greedy, that wanting financial security is selfish, and that good people should not care about material success. When Emma enters a relationship with someone who is financially successful and comfortable discussing money, she finds herself triggered by what she perceives as materialism or superficiality. She's encountering not just her personal shadow around money, but her family's generational shadow around wealth and success. Similarly, families or cultures that have suppressed certain aspects of sexuality, creativity, or emotional expression will often produce individuals who are intensely triggered when their partners embody these qualities. The partner becomes a carrier for everything the family or cultural system has rejected, making them a target for projections that go far beyond personal psychology. This pattern explains why some relationship conflicts feel particularly intense or irrational, why we sometimes find ourselves reacting with a fury that seems disproportionate to the actual situation. We are not just responding to our partner's behavior, but to generations of collective wounding and suppression that they have unconsciously activated within us. The psychological consequence of unrecognized collective shadow projections is the perpetuation of generational patterns of rejection and conflict. Individuals find themselves inexplicably triggered by partners who embody qualities that their family or cultural system has long suppressed. The spiritual opportunity, however, is profound. By consciously working with these projections, we can heal not just our personal wounds, but contribute to the healing of collective patterns that have been passed down through generations. The sixth pattern Jung discovered is what he called the phenomenon of psychological infection, the unconscious transmission of emotional and psychological states between intimate partners. Jung observed that people in close relationships often begin to unconsciously absorb each other's psychological material, emotional states, and even symptoms. This goes beyond simple empathy or emotional resonance. It is a deep psychological merging that can lead to confusion about whose feelings, thoughts, or problems actually belong to whom. Sarah finds herself becoming increasingly anxious after beginning a relationship with Mark, who struggles with chronic worry about his career. Initially, she attributes her anxiety to external stressors, but over time, she realizes that she is unconsciously absorbing and processing Mark's unexpressed fears. Her psyche has become a container for his disowned anxiety, leaving her feeling overwhelmed by emotions that are not even her own. This psychological infection occurs because intimate relationships create a shared psychological field, a kind of emotional ecosystem where individual boundaries become permeable. While this can create beautiful intimacy and connection, it can also lead to psychological enmeshment, where partners lose track of their individual emotional and psychological territories. Jung understood that this phenomenon serves an evolutionary purpose. It allows us to deeply understand and empathize with our partners, creating bonds that go beyond surface-level compatibility. However, without conscious awareness, psychological infection can lead to the loss of individual identity and the development of symptoms or behaviors that are not authentically our own. The psychological consequence of unconscious psychological infection is the gradual erosion of individual identity within relationships. Partners may find themselves acting in ways that feel foreign to their true nature, developing problems they never had before, or losing touch with their own emotional center. The spiritual invitation is to develop what Jung called psychological differentiation, the ability to be deeply intimate with another person while maintaining clear awareness of your own psychological boundaries and authentic nature. The seventh and most profound pattern Jung identified is the activation of what he called the transcendent function through relationship conflict. Jung believed that psychological growth occurs through the tension of opposites, the dynamic interplay between conflicting aspects of the psyche. Intimate relationships naturally create this tension by bringing together individuals with different perspectives, needs, and ways of being in the world. When Lisa, who values security and predictability, partners with David, who thrives on adventure and spontaneity, their relationship becomes a laboratory for the integration of opposing psychological forces. Their conflicts are not just personal disagreements, but encounters between different ways of organizing reality and approaching life. Lisa must encounter her own suppressed need for adventure and spontaneity through David, while David must engage with his own need for security and stability through Lisa. Jung discovered that these apparently irreconcilable differences can, through conscious engagement, give birth to a third way of being that transcends and includes both positions. This is the transcendent function at work, the psyche's capacity to create new possibilities through the creative tension of opposites. Lisa might develop what Jung would call a differentiated relationship to both security and adventure, able to access both depending on what the situation requires. David might integrate his spontaneous nature with a more grounded approach to life, becoming someone who can adventure from a place of inner stability. This pattern reveals why some of the most growth-producing relationships are also the most challenging. The partners who trigger us most intensely are often the ones carrying the very qualities we most need to develop within ourselves. The friction is not a sign that the relationship is wrong, but an indication that profound psychological work is attempting to emerge through the partnership. The psychological consequence of unconscious engagement with the transcendent function is chronic conflict without resolution, endless cycles of argument and misunderstanding that never lead to growth or deeper intimacy. The spiritual opportunity is immense. Conscious engagement with these dynamics can lead to the development of previously inaccessible aspects of ourselves and the creation of relationship dynamics that neither partner could have achieved alone. Here lies the ultimate revelation that Jung spent a lifetime understanding. Relationships trigger us not because they are failing, but because they are succeeding at their deepest purpose. Every intimate relationship is an encounter with the unknown aspects of ourselves, a meeting between conscious identity and unconscious potential. The person who irritates, challenges, and triggers you most intensely is often your greatest teacher, carrying qualities, perspectives, and ways of being that your psyche knows you need to integrate. The triggers you experience in relationships are not obstacles to overcome, but doorways to walk through. They mark the exact locations where your psyche is ready to expand, where old patterns are ready to be released, and where new capacities are waiting to be born. Jung understood that the goal of relationship is not harmony or comfort, but consciousness and growth, the gradual expansion of who we think we are into who we are capable of becoming. This reframe transforms everything. Instead of seeing your partner's triggering behavior as a problem to be solved, you begin to see it as information about your own psychological landscape. Instead of trying to change them, you become curious about what aspect of yourself they are reflecting back to you. Instead of avoiding conflict, you begin to approach it as sacred work, the conscious engagement with unconscious material that leads to psychological integration and spiritual growth. The ultimate invitation Jung offers is to see your intimate relationships as spiritual practices, ongoing opportunities for conscious engagement with the unknown aspects of yourself. Every argument becomes a meditation on projection. Every trigger becomes a doorway to shadow work. Every moment of attraction or repulsion becomes data about what you are ready to heal, integrate, or develop within yourself. This is the path of conscious relationship, the willingness to use your most intimate connections as vehicles for psychological and spiritual development. It requires tremendous courage because it means acknowledging that the person who triggers you most intensely might be exactly the teacher your soul has called forth. It demands humility because it means recognizing that your judgments of your partner often reveal more about your own unconscious material than about their actual character. But this path also offers the promise of authentic intimacy, relationships based not on the comfortable repetition of familiar patterns, but on the ongoing mutual discovery of previously unknown aspects of ourselves and each other. It suggests the possibility of partnerships that serve not just personal happiness, but conscious evolution, relationships that make both partners more whole, integrated, and authentically themselves. As you move forward in your own relationships, carry with you Jung's profound insight. You are never just relating to another person, but to the complex interplay of conscious and unconscious forces that they activate within you. Every trigger is a teacher, every conflict a curriculum, every moment of reactivity an invitation to discover something new about the vast psychological landscape that exists within you, waiting to be explored, understood, and ultimately, lovingly integrated into the fullness of who you are becoming.